is an interactive talk show program designed to discuss serious issues that sometimes are not often spoken about, but issues that we here in the South Leeward Conference want to bring to the fore and to give our viewers an opportunity to interact with us as we go along. Of course, I am Dr. Greene, President of the South Leeward Conference, and I just want to take the opportunity to wish all of our fathers out there, wherever you are, a very happy Father's Day. Trust that you have been treated today and that you're doing well, and that you will keep the serious responsibility of providing leadership, guidance, direction, and just being a positive role model to all of our fathers. Today, we are delighted to be back. We are going to be discussing a very important subject. We are talking about money. And when we talk about money, people get excited. We are going to be discussing the Seventh-day Adventist financial structure. There is, of course, a lot of misunderstanding with regards to what the church does with money and why we need to do what we do, etc. We are going to be discussing that. We are privileged and delighted to have with us just about the best person that I could have found to do this with us this afternoon. I am delighted to introduce to you at this time the gentleman who occupies the position as treasurer of the Caribbean Union of Seventh-day Adventists. We are delighted to have Pastor Bertie Henry with us. Pastor Henry, an ordained minister, by the way. It is not very often that you become an ordained minister when your background and experience is in the area of finance. But he has so distinguished himself in the pulpit, in his church, in pastoral ministry, though he studied finance, that the union was very pleased to ordain him as a Seventh-day Adventist minister. Pastor Henry has functioned in the past as the chief administrator for the Davis Memorial Hospital. He also served as the business manager for Caribbean Union College, now University of the Southern Caribbean. He has served on the CURF, the Caribbean Union Revolving Fund Board, as its director at one time, and he now occupies the position as the treasurer, the chief financial officer of the Caribbean Union of Seventh-day Adventists. We are delighted to have you with us, and let's talk this afternoon. Pastor Henry, good evening, welcome, and please just say hello to all of our viewers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greene. I am certainly delighted to be with the all-time progressive conference, South Leeward Conference. I want to join you in wishing our fathers a very happy Father's Day. Today, I hope tomorrow it continues your celebration, and for the rest of the year as you take up your role as fathers. I'm happy to be with you in the South Leeward Conference and to have this discussion. I am just pleased and excited that God can speak to us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Elder Henry, you did say South Leeward Conference. Yes, indeed, it is the South Leeward Conference that hosts this program, but we do have viewers from all around the Caribbean, and in fact, from as far as you can imagine. We people from all over the world listen to us right now. I just checked our chat board there, and I see somebody from Dominica. We have folks from Puerto Rico. We have folks from England, and so it's reaching way beyond the shores of the South Leeward Conference.
Okay.
Well, friends, viewers, we want to at this time just have a word of prayer, shall we? Almighty Father and our God, we give you thanks for the privilege and opportunity to be able to present on Let's Talk again. We ask that you will guide in our discussions and grant that the information presented will prove meaningful in resolving issues and creating a better understanding of the structure that you have given your church and how we manage the finances accordingly. Take full control and grant us your wisdom and your grace in Jesus' name. Amen. So, Elder Henry, it is again a delight to have you with us. Oftentimes in the discussions I've had with many persons I've listened to, been involved in conversations, and sometimes just hear people discussing back and forth. There are lots of individuals who ask questions about what does a church do with money. Some people say the Adventist church has plenty money. I've discovered that there's a lot of misunderstanding. So I'm going to ask you if you can just give us a brief overview of the financial structure of the organization at this time.
Begin with the most important element in the whole structure. I must say we have emphasized that over and over again. Only last week we had a big important meeting on division with the union treasurers and had local field treasurers involved. But the local church, the local member, the local church, that is where the important element is. And the local church receives the tithe and offerings, and that is the tithe is sent on to the conference or mission, in your case the conference, and that goes on to the union and to the division and to the general conference. And there is a wide scope of work to be done. You know, we are given the task by Jesus, by God himself, to build this world with the gospel. And this is exactly what we are attempting to do. And in doing so, we are tackling the proclamation of this gospel in different angles. We use hospitals, schools, missionary programs. There's just a variety. And the thing about this, Dr. Greene, is that the situation is different in so many different parts of the world. We in the Caribbean, we are immune to some situations, but in other parts of the world, spreading the gospel is not so easy. Getting workers is not so easy, while the population is so large. And that is why every member is called to be involved in participating in this whole matter of proclamation of the gospel.
So Elder, let's take it from the very simplest level. I go to church, and the deacon comes around with the receptacle, and I put in that receptacle my tithes and my offerings. What happens? What does the church keep? What does it send further on, etc.? So if as a worker I return $100 for tithe and $100 for offering, what happens with that?
Well, the storehouse established by the church is requested by God that the tithe should be returned to the storehouse. That tithe, the full tithe, goes on to the conference. The conference then would give 10% of that tithe to the union and 10% to the division. Part of that also goes to the general conference, but the conference itself gives 10% and 10%. And for the offering, the church retains 60% and sends 40% to the conference. The conference retains 20% of that for conference development and sends on 20% to the division.
Okay, let's before you, I know you have a lot more to say, but just so that all of our viewers can follow us quite clearly. So you're indicating that the local church where I return my tithes and my offering, the local church takes all of the tithes and passes it on to the conference.
100%.
And in addition, the local church takes the offering now, and the 60% of it keeps, and 40% it passes on.
Yes.
When that offering gets to the conference office, you're saying that the conference now takes half of that amount,
yes,
and passes it on. I believe that is called missions offering. What happens to that?
Mission offering, that's right.
Yes. Well, let's, just so that we can follow one by one. So what happens to that mission offering?
Okay. The mission offering goes up to the general conference. When Well, you know, the General Conference, the headquarters is in Maryland, but the offices established in the different divisions, that is a part of the General Conference. So that offering, as it goes up to the division or the General Conference office, one, that offering is used as the non-tithe source of funding to do extensive mission. That is, there are so many areas we covered by the offering going up. The offering, we have to deal with things like the different activities that a general conference itself would sponsor, the operation of the conference itself. But a large portion of that, as a matter of fact, like 71% of that offering is returned to the fields, the unions and the local fields in different forms. That is like we have what we call international service employees. You have a place where there's a need. There's a need for a specialist, a doctor, a professor in different areas. And that person, their budget is funded, or missionaries going to certain places. Their budget is funded by the General Conference. And so that comes out of that. They also, part of that goes to ADRA. You know, ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency, would join with government funding and funding disaster and major community development projects and so on. So part of funding goes to that also. And also there are some other special areas, including the running of the office, of course, and the running of the office together with the salaries and the operation of the office, that takes up about approximately 24% of that total amount.
So now, Elder, you're saying that essentially this offering that is called missions offering, if I don't give offering, then I'm hindering the work of missions. And earlier on, you mentioned that there are so many places in the world where it is really difficult to do missionary work to advance the cause of God. And you're indicating that with the financing of ADRA and its operations and sending physicians to some of these areas, that offering does that. So let me ask you a question here. If, because I don't want my money to go to the conference, because you hear people say this all the time, I, instead of giving tithes and offering, I give tithes and I give to building funds. And I say that way the money stays in the local church. Then I am impacting not just the conference, but you're saying the worldwide church and its missions program?
Being seriously affected, yes. But we're missing it. We're missing a fundamental point here. The giving of offering is not just about raising funds. We give an offering to God. You know, as in Bible times, you always came up with an offering. Deuteronomy said we shouldn't come to the presence of the Lord without an offering. We give an offering. If we are then to decide how that offering is to be used, then we are negating the whole motive for it. And God has designed that for our benefit, mind you. And we can talk a little more about that. But yes, for instance, let me give you some other statistics on that would help you understand. Maybe I can take the Northern Asia Pacific Division. That includes China and Japan and Mongolia and Taiwan and all those places. The population of that territory is about 1.6 billion people.
Wow, that's a lot of people. 1.6 billion.
Billion people, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
China itself alone is about just about 1.3 billion people. So the division in a meeting just last year in annual council has had to take that directly under their wings, so to speak, because of the difficulty, the culture, the vastness, the limiting resources. You know, they have some barriers with the Chinese government and so on. So the division has had to now being able to get funding into a lot of projects and individuals in those areas. And so, but the work is spreading. People are being baptized. Now, in our territory, we just have a small population. You baptize 10,000, a whole lot, or 3,000. But those large areas with millions and billions of people, I mean, more than a billion people, they baptize thousands also, just like us. But look the ratio. And so, when we contribute our offering, we can tell ourselves that we are doing exactly what God wants us to do, being part of the proclamation of His gospel to the world, because we are supporting that. So
you mentioned something there. Well, two things. One, to put into perspective, you're saying that this region of the world with 1.6 billion people and very few Seventh Adventists. In fact, in terms of ratio, I remember when I was at the last General Conference session, one guy was illustrating, and he said that if every Seventh Adventist were to talk to one member every day, one non-Seventh Adventist every day, in our division, it would probably take 3 years to talk to everybody. But in that section of the world, it would probably take 50-something years, just to give us a sense of the enormity of the task before us. Yeah. And you're indicating that lots of our mission offering is used to fund the work in those areas. There's a second point you mentioned, and I will come back to it because hopefully, because I hear you mention something. You're saying that when, based on the Bible, when God says we must bring an offering to the Lord, He never told us that we must determine how that offering is used. And you're saying that members must not take from the church the right to determine how the offering is used. Did I get you correctly?
You got me correctly, sir.
Okay, wonderful. We'll come back to that in a while. Well, let's talk about the other part of the offering that goes on to the conference, the other half, because the church keeps 60, it sends 40 to the conference. The conference is now dividing that in two and sending half to missions and half it keeps for conference development. Let's just, in a nutshell, what is that used for?
Well, the conference committee, the local conference committee, is the one who determines how that is to be used. Just like the offering that goes up to GC, the executive committee decides that, no one person. Same as the local conference, the conference committee sits and decides what is the best strategic way this money can be used for the development of the work in our field.
And so development of the work, we are talking about infrastructural development, building churches and assisting with hospitals and those kinds of things.
Yes, mainly capital development.
Yeah, so it's important, I just want our listeners to be mindful of the fact that the conference does not use that for its operations, for its regular operations. All right.
That's correct. That's important because, as a matter of fact, some conferences have tried to distance themselves so much that they have appointed a separate committee who prayerfully, work with that. Of course, the conference is involved all the while as they give guidance, because sometimes there are some areas, if the conference can only make some developmental investment there, it would really expand the work exponentially, as against one person, one church just doing something. So it will impact sometimes the entire field just with one project. So yes, prayerfully, they decide what are the best projects that can benefit from those funds.
Well, let's now talk about the tithe, because the tithe is distinct, different from the offering. So when the conference gets the tithe, now that becomes a part of its operating budget, but it does something else. So give us a sense of what happens, and right up through the general conference.
Well, the tithe is used. The conference is a storehouse. And so they decide, again, there are some specific rules on that. Now remember, God Himself is the one who gave the ratio on that, 1/10. That was established, even before the Hebrews, since Abraham, way back in Genesis, we find the tithe. And that system was kept right through. Of course, Christ make mention of it in the New Testament. When a tithe goes to the conference, which we guard and come to accept as our storehouse, then that money is then disbursed. First of all, supporting the organization, the whole organization structure, going to the union and the division. And as it goes up there, the portion that remains after that 20%, they also contribute towards tertiary education. We have a university in this part, and a percentage of that goes to that 6%. We also contribute, Tithe is also used a small portion to literary evangelists, 1%. But the rest of the tithe has specific uses, and that is to use the operating the work in the area, paying pastors, supporting all those who are involved in the work of proclamation or winning souls for Christ, evangelistic efforts, evangelistic equipment, all of those covered under tithe operation. The operation of the office, all those who support the proclamation in the local field, and then at the union and the division, that tithe is also used for those purposes. For their program.
Okay, so you have said quite a mouthful there, Elder. When the conference receives $1 tithe, you are saying that 10% of that goes as tithe to the union, and another 10% is tithe to the division.
Yes.
And 6% to the university.
Yes.
And 1% for publishing.
Yes.
And then I don't think you mentioned this, but also to IATS, the Inter-American Theological Seminary, another 0.5%.
No. That comes out of the 10% that goes to division. I just covered on the 10%.
Oh, okay. So essentially, therefore, we're saying that 27%, before the conference begins to do anything else, before it begins to give subsidies to its own local institutions, etc., 27% of it. 26 and 1% to the yes, so that's 27%.
Yes.
Is already accounted for.
Yes.
So right. Which means that for every $1 that the conference gets, it before it does anything else, it says that 27 cents is gone.
Yes.
All right. Wonderful. Now, those monies that go up to the larger organization are important in terms of funding those levels of the organization. I don't know if you can just comment briefly on that before we get back to the local conference.
Right. At the next level, at the union level, there are programs that we roll out for the entire union division. They roll out programs also, so they have directors and others involved in those programs. Also, some of that monies go back to the fields to help those fields within the area. It helps them augment their income. So some of it goes back as what we call appropriation. So it goes back into the field for evangelistic work, helps with programming. We produce certain things like gleanings and other things, feed it back. Also, the work there in several areas, agile work and other things, they go back to the field. So it helps, some of it goes back to the field as appropriation to the local field. And then they use some of it at that level to fund their operations. The workers, very often is a smaller group of workers, and the program that they would have that would benefit those fields also. Then also evangelism in those fields. Like in every local field, whatever evangelistic effort they have, especially for the laity, the union, the next higher organization would give part of that, would bear part of that cost. And also sometimes large programs are planned for those fields. It's heavily subsidized also by the union. Same thing, the division also would return some monies.
Okay, now if we come back to the local church, in other words, before I come back to the local conference, what I hear you saying effectively, Elder, is that when a member returns tithe, that member is participating in not just his or her local church or local conference, but is also making a contribution towards the union and the division, and hence the general conference, because the general conference effectively is getting its funding through the local member in,
Yes.
in the local congregation.
That is right. That's very correct.
All right. And that's so important.
It's different from other structures where a pastor can pastor a church and he receives all the tithe. It goes out, and the conference is the one who gives management to that fund. It goes up, right up, helping the work right through to the general conference.
Okay, wonderful, interesting. Now let's get back to the local conference, because now after we would have given the tithe and the funding to the the larger organization, we effectively have 73% of the tithe dollar remaining. And my treasurer has indicated that we give approximately 20% as subsidies to our various institutions, our schools and our senior citizens home, etc., which means that what we are left with is just a little bit over 50% of the tithe that comes before we begin to pay any bills, before we begin to deal with salaries, before we begin to deal with operating expenses. I think it is important that members understand the dynamic nature of how the church functions. I like to say, thank God for the Seventh Adventist Church, because, you know, if you mentioned just now that it is not a system where the pastor keeps the tithe for himself. So if you have a large church, you're doing well, and if you have a small church, you're not doing well.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so now, in the interest of time, because, you know, there are a few questions here, and I don't want to rob our listeners of getting their questions answered. So I want to go. I'm seeing that we have listeners from French Guiana, from Panama, from, you know, I mean, so we're speaking to the world church, more or less. Here is a question that somebody asked, and I'm glad you are on this afternoon, because you are the best person to answer this question. Is it mandatory for churches to submit the tithes to the conference? And if yes, what are the measures in place to ensure compliance?
Yes, it's mandatory. It's mandatory because this is the collective system, collective decision that we have made to establish that system. Of course, inspired by God, we believe that with all our hearts. And so it's mandatory. And the way we ensure that that is done is through the checks and balances we have established. There's a report being done by the local treasurer in the church that is sent to the conference, which indicates the tithe received and how much is remitted to the conference. And then there's the other level or tier of checks and balance, and that is we have a local auditor who would then check the books of the church to make sure that that happens.
Okay, very well. So that the local church does not use the tithe at all. So members who go to local churches and return only tithe but no offering, are they contributing to the local church at all?
They're not. They're really not contributing to the local church, because that money passes through the local church. Tithe passes through the local church to the conference. So they're not contributing to the local church if they don't give an offering. And
No.
I just want to say that here is the really test of the member's relationship to God, because the offering is what we return to, give to God as gratitude, our hearts, gratitude for God's blessing to us.
I was going to say we started this afternoon with the assumption that you know, most of our viewers understand the biblical counsel that is given in Scripture, and I want to make reference, for example, to Malachi chapter 3, where God says, "Bring ye all the tithe into the storehouse." The understanding that the tithe is sacred and belongs to God. I mean, we're not necessarily here doing a study on tithing as we are explaining the financial structure of the church, but it is important to emphasize that we didn't pull these policies out of thin air. we looked at the biblical references and what God says and the instructions he gives in his words. He tells us that the tithe, we use Malachi, for example, as it being holy. And God says, if we refuse to return our tithes and offerings, then we are robbing God. I believe that's a very serious injunction.
It's very, very serious. As serious as that. God could not be clearer and simpler in his pronouncement in Malachi. And Jesus said that we shouldn't forget that also. He said in the New Testament. Of course, in the Old Testament, God says when he asked Israel to return the tithe, he said, return the tithe to me, it is mine. And then he gave it to the Levites. So returning tithes to God, he gives it to his word.
Now here's another very important question. Just switching back to the whole matter of the offering. Somebody's asking, what would you say to members who, instead of giving regular offerings, donate to sponsor a child or so with Child Impact International or other SDA charity? You know, there are all these charities that ask people to sponsor here and there, good things in themselves. What would you say to an individual who says, I'm going to use my offering and sponsor this child here or send this child to school accordingly? How would you respond to that? And not give it to the church, but they decide they're going to use it themselves.
Right. You see, as I tried to indicate earlier, that the giving of offering is not about raising funds. So bringing an offering is part of our worship. God says, come and bring an offering. So it's part of our worship, how we praise God, how we acknowledge God's blessing upon our lives in the first instance. Secondly, it's not just for, yes, we can give to those charitable means and causes. They're worthy. I mean, I do, and several others do. But that does not take away from the offering I bring to God as I go to church. So that individual is missing a blessing. They're skipping a blessing that God is intending for them. The charitable, giving to charity and so on, is very good. But you can decide, okay, God, you've blessed me, so here's my offering, but I can also contribute to a charity. No problem with that. But you don't move away from one, because remember that this giving of the offering, it impacts the whole work of God worldwide. And so you want to be able to contribute to that impact, because Christ has given us that commission. And so we want to do that, and we can still give to charity. There's no problem.
I mean, it's amazing, Elder, because, you know, I never thought, I've never looked at the concept of giving to charity in the light that the person asks the question. I mean, I also, you know, give to charity in terms of sponsoring children in some of these organizations. But for once has it never entered my mind that this is a part of my offering. You know, that is something personal that I choose to do, or that my wife and I choose to do. That has nothing to do with the offering that God says, bring an offering. Now, bring an offering sounds to me like a command. And if God says, bring an offering, then, and I don't bring it, then I'm disobeying God.
That's why he said in Malachi, where have you robbed me in tithes and offering? In Malachi, tithes and offering of God.
That's very true.
Yes.
And now that I think is a serious consideration there, that when I refuse to do that I'm really going against the implicit command of God. I want to go to another question, or this looks more like a comment. Somebody Raul Shaw is indicating that our giving should be systematic, organized, and consistent. But once you have fulfilled your duty to the church does not limit nor prevent anyone from giving to other worthy causes. So I guess he was also responding to the person who.
I agree with that fully. It has our giving is not just deciding when you go how much the person asks, how much appeal they make, but your giving has to be systematic, has to be planned. When it's that way, you receive the blessing, because remember that giving is based on God's blessing coming to you. So your response to God's blessing is the giving.
Now, there are some other questions that we are going to go into, but before we do that, I kind of want to establish a platform. Let's go back to the 60-20-20 plan. I've heard members say that this is interfering with the local church's ability to function effectively. Now, what you have explained so far suggests to me that it is an excellent way for us to be able to impact the world in terms of making ministry happen. And you use the illustration of the work in places like China and Japan, where it is so difficult to operate and function. And a part of that missions offering is facilitating those things. We make reference to the 1040 window, that portion of the world where it is extremely difficult. In fact, some persons, I have heard testimonies of individuals who have said, listen, if a family member becomes converted to Christianity, their family will kill them. And if the family doesn't, the state would. So it's really difficult operating under those conditions. And when we can contribute an offering that assists the work, the organized work in those places, I think that's a tremendous blessing. But now, for those who are resistant to this, when they say that the church is being robbed, the church can't operate on 60%, etc., is that really the case, or is there another issue involved here?
Yes, I want to support you on the first point you made first of all. I wouldn't give the name of the person or where they're from, but yes, a young man, his own family, because he was set up to inherit, and his own family sent individuals to wipe him out, to kill him. But he survived. He moved to another country, and God was able to provide him, and he was able to come and testify of how God has been good to him and blessed him. And he has started an operation in that place, and he's now being able to witness, not witness openly like we do it, but he's able to witness by the kind things he's doing in the community. But he has accepted the gospel. Now, when a church feels that, remember that in the church, we had a system where we had several offerings, birthday thank offering, we could sacrifice, you just name it, investment offering. We have lots of offerings at different times. What a church has done prayerfully is that, because when we had this system, some churches, they put a little into that, and they have the Sabbath school offering, another offering, to put some money in there. The church has said, okay, let's hold this combined offering plan, put it all together. And as a result of that, and divide up that way, as a result of that, some churches are getting more. Some churches have testified that they're getting more. Others are getting less, based on where the members are putting their funds. And so this is something that serves the cause, the proclamation, and the members justify that they are making a serious contribution to the work.
Okay, very well. So now let's go to this question. This question says, there are all kinds of fundraising activities that are being employed now by many churches. What is our position on this? There's some persons, one individual reported to me that, sometimes on Sunday mornings you see church members standing on the road selling food. They say, our church has been constructed and we want you to assist. So people are doing all kinds of fundraising, and Ella, did you get that?
No, you stuck just now, so I didn't get you clearly.
Okay, so the question is relating to fundraisers. Yes. And what is permissible and what is not permissible. Is it permissible for the brethren to go on the side of the road, sell food because they're constructing a church, etc.? They're saying that individuals are raising all kinds of funds. What is permissible, what is not permissible?
You can raise funds for some projects, but funds are not raised for the preaching of the gospel. We don't do fundraising to pay, to do evangelism, to pay for pastors. We don't do fundraising for those things. Particular projects, you can raise funds. That is permitted. Actually, what is the best model? And if we go back to Bible times, we notice when the temple was being constructed, they asked the individuals to bring a special offering. And people willing, knowing that this is God's work, this is God's house we are going to be contributing to, they pour their offering in. And this is really the ideal model, that people can step forward and give of whatever they have, a portion of that for the upbuilding, if they want to build a particular section of the church or whatever. And today, people still do that in the church, people sacrificially. Some people give finance while others give up their time and talent, their efforts to do construction work in churches. And so, but there are activities where fundraising is permitted. You have a Pathfinder club and they want to raise some funds for a particular project. They can raise funds. They're permitted to do that. So there are certain segments of the church, but for the operation of the church, we do not raise money for that.
I also want, thank you so much for that, Elder. And I'm glad you mentioned the Pathfinder Club, because I know that, there are a few departments that are permitted to do fundraising. But I also want to add, just for the benefit of our viewers, that whenever we are establishing a fund, whether it be a pew fund, a bus fund, or something to that effect, that has to be established by a vote of the church board. That individual departments don't just get up and determine that we are going to do this and it becomes so. So a trust fund is created by a vote of the church board. And when, if we have a building fund, when the building is completed, then we should do away with the building fund likewise. It is important to recognize that.
But Elder, yes, the board needs to prayerfully and carefully consider if this is the way they want to go, establish this fund for this particular project. Very often it's good when they give it a timeline, also a time frame. This fund is to be raised until this time or whatever. That's very good also. But yet the board together prayerfully must give that permission, that decision.
I want to go to another question. Here, the individual is asking, what do you think about giving to independent ministries? Now, this is a big area. There are lots of individuals who say, well, this guy is over there preaching the gospel. It sounds to me like he's preaching the Advent message. So I'm going to give my tithe to him. I'm going to support his ministry and therefore not the church, because I agree with what he's doing and not necessarily what my local church is doing. Kindly comment on giving to independent ministries. Maybe we need to talk about what independent ministries really mean.
I am really happy for that. I'm really happy that you made that last statement. What is independent ministry? We have several independent ministries, and it's independent ministry. All it means that you are not being funded by the organized or the structure of the church. That's all it means. But you're preaching the same gospel. 3ABN, for instance, is an independent ministry. So that what they teach is exactly what the church teaches. And somebody can establish another area of independent ministry, some health facility. They are operating it to do and accomplish the same thing the church is set up to do, just that they're doing it independently. It's not managed by the church. And as a matter of fact, the church has a structure in place which gives guidance to those independent ministries also. They support them, they help them in different ways. So, and they're given a platform in a lot of church activities. So that's independent ministries, in its purest sense. When somebody now breaks out from the church and want to teach something different, then that is a different kind of ministry we're talking about.
So Elder, there are those that you may want to say are supportive of the church. And you mentioned 3ABN.
At the GC, there are policies set up to give guidance to setting up independent ministries.
But now let me follow up with this question. So if there is an independent ministries, I can think of an independent supportive ministry, like, as you mentioned, 3ABN. I can think of Breath of Life, you know, that really does support and encourages church programs and church activities, etc.
Yes.
But the question is, should I funnel my giving from the local church to the independent ministry? If I want to support an independent ministry, I like Carlton Bird and how he preaches. Should I say I'm not giving my offering to the local church? I'm going to send it to Breath of Life instead.
Again, that shouldn't happen, because the independent ministry, as you know, would be much more limited in its scope. The dollar can be would be given more elasticity, would cover more ground if it's given to the organized body, who would cover a larger area than the independent ministry. However, you can, and you're free to, after knowing that this independent ministry was properly set up and it's in keeping with what the church promulgates, then you're free to also contribute to that independent ministry, not in lieu of, or not to the detriment of your contribution or your offering to the local church. Just as you said, there are other charitable organizations you can give to. Independent ministry is one that you can also give to. You can plan that and give to them, even systematically, no problem.
Now I'm trying to get as many questions as possible in this afternoon. I'm taking them as they come. So an individual here is asking, does tithe and offering have to be money? This person wants to know if tithe and offering have to be money.
Well, tithe in some places, in Bible times, they give of their cattle and so on. In some places, some parts of the world, that's still up things. That's still up things. But where the money is used, because money is the best and easiest system to transfer value. And so we can send up tithe to the division easier, to the union, to the general conference easier, and they can use it in another place very easier because of its form, money. Money is what makes it pretty easy. If you give a cow, then that can be used anywhere.
Now there are two questions here, Elder, one at a time. This one says, based on the breakdown of how the tithes and offerings are allocated, what is the encouraged minimum offering a member should give relative to their tithe? Now that's an interesting question. It says, what is the recommended minimum?
I love that. I love it. And I would not venture where God did not.
Okay.
God says 1/10 is your tithe. And he says bring an offering. Whenever you come, bring an offering. And in the Old Testament, as well as the New, it's indicated you bring an offering based on the blessing God has given you. It's not that here God has given you this and you're asking for so much. It's based on the blessing you receive from God and your gratitude to God. So that is determined by you. Members give sometimes 50% of their tithe. Some give 100%, amount equal to tithe. And members give even more than their tithe. It's left for them, because these members are seeing how God is blessing them as they show that he is in charge of all my resources. So that is a very individual matter. And you see, the thing about it, offering was established for man's benefit. For man's benefit. That is, it helps you in your character development, in your motive. You get joy out of doing that. And so many ways you can ask, and mankind is discovering long after how giving helps he himself, how he himself benefits from giving. And God has established that from day one because he wants us to experience the joy of giving.
I'm seeing a principle in the Bible, and we don't have time to go into all the details of this. I'm looking up at the clock and our time is almost up.
Wow.
But I'm seeing a principle here in the Bible, Elder, that really speaks, and I'll just quote briefly, that God blesses us when we give. You know, he did say, cast your bread upon the waters, and after many days it will come back to you. So we receive God's blessing sometimes in proportion to the extent to which we're willing to exercise faith and give. And we really cannot outgive God. It is important for us to know that.
As a matter of fact, more than often, you get more than you give for God. You receive more. That's what God says, bring me the tithe. I will bless you. You got to trust me in this faith. Offering the same thing. God blesses us based as we give, God blesses us.
Just to go back to that question that asks about the minimum recommended minimum. I suspect rather that what the individual is saying is that, you know, if you have a church budget and when you consider what the church needs to operate on locally, you know, sometimes in the presentation of the budget to the church, the pastor can say to the member, well, listen, this budget is built on 50% of the tithe or 70% of the tithe. So if we're going to balance our budget, this is a given guide. And I kind of suspect that that's where the person is going. Not sure, but I suspect. But here is another question that follows closely to this one. And this individual says, if my tithe is $50, what would you recommend my offering be if I also give to 3ABN? Now, I believe you kind of answered this in part earlier, but for emphasis.
Yes, I'm saying that you're offering and giving to 3ABN are two different things. You have to give to the local church. That's where the church operates. That's church. That is ministry as you give there. And then we could not and do not, because God didn't, we could not stipulate exactly what amount offering should be. You just know that in your heart, as you pray to God, he will impress you. And as you give, you'll experience his blessing. He has promised, and trust me, he is faithful who has promised.
Because this has come up so often, Elder, again, we're effectively saying that the biblical injunction is that you should return your offerings to God and not to an independent ministry. You can support an independent ministry if you wish to, but that is not supposed to take away from your offering commitment to the church.
That is right, exactly. That's correct. The church, the giving to offering to the church is like giving to God, and you appreciate God, you go to church, and it's part of your worship. As you worship God, thank you, God, for your blessing upon my life. And there's so much blessings from God that we take for granted sometimes. That's why our offering is so limited. But when we think of how much God has blessed us in so many ways, not only monetarily, but God has blessed us in so many ways, we would want to give to God and allow him to use the resources for his cause.
Okay, now there was a question with respect to, again, instructing new members in how they give their offering. I believe we have spoken to that sufficiently to move on to another question in the remaining time we have here. This person says, I respect the fact that we are expounding on the tithes and offerings, but what about expounding on the way to treat widows and the fatherless? And the person signs a concerned member. Because I was confronted with a situation like this earlier this week, Elder, I want to comment, and then you can put in your portion there, that the local church operates community services. And if members are faithful in returning their tithes and their offerings, it is very likely that the church will not have any issues balancing its budget. There are lots of members. I mean, I pastored at the local church level. I know what I'm saying. Lots of members who return a tithe faithfully, but no offering. But if members return, and because the offering is in proportion to the way God has blessed you. So if I'm returning $300 for tithe and $10 for offering, I'm really indicating that God has not really been blessing me. And then maybe I'll begin to live that out in my life. But the local church should be operating a community outreach project to take care of the needs. But let me add to this. Well, go ahead first.
Yes, I want to agree with you fully. If a church is struggling, it means that the members are not giving as they should. I go to a local church too, and everybody, even pastors, they also give offering. But in my church, we have established the budget covenant. So we look at the budget, and we know that 60% of what we expect as offering should cover the expenses, and we include those community services aspects. And so, regardless of where I am at any time, I know that my monthly commitment to God is so much. And regardless of if I don't be at the church in person and present for 2 months, that doesn't take away anything from the amount I'm giving to the church. And then that church would then be able to deal with, and church always need to look out for the widows and the poor and needy. Matter of fact, sometimes there are special offering picked up for them, but the church from its resources also will minister to them through the community services.
Well, Elder, we are just about out of time, and I want to thank you so much for responding to the invitation to come and share with us. We will always have other opportunities to bring you back again. There are 1 or 2 questions that we didn't have time to answer, but we have to wrap up. There's a 4 o'clock appointment also. So what I want to say at this time is that, if people are listening, they can send their questions in. And if the need arises, Elder, we will have you back to continue to speak on this very important subject. There was a question on church building that we didn't get to, but I do want to say at this